This is the Game Time Guru podcast, where I interview sports figures from all over the world to help deliver a panoramic view on sports. So whether you're a former athlete, one of the crazies, or simply a casual sports fan, this is the perfect show for you as we peel back the curtains and learn from our guests every single week. I'm your host, Shane Larson, and I'm helping you see sports through a different lens. What's up, everyone? Welcome out to the Game Time Guru podcast. Again, my name is Shane Larson. I am the host of the show. We're going on almost 4 years. We've hit over 81 different countries, 55,000 plus downloads of the show. The show continues to grow as we build out the brand. And it wouldn't be possible without our amazing sponsors over at 208 Printing. So make sure to go check them out, madeby208.com. Check out 208 Printing. They're local here in the Treasure Valley, but they will do anything. So if you're a listener outside of Idaho, it doesn't matter. If you want print done, you want your hats done, you want any of your merchandise taken care of, they're your guys. Go to 208 Printing. You can follow them on Instagram, Facebook, and you can also go to madeby208.com to get any business inquiries for them as well. So today's special, you guys heard it in the introduction, I've got an amazing guest on the show. We're going to talk about the history of mixed martial arts in the state of Idaho, specifically in the Treasure Valley as well. And you guys have heard me, you know, I've had different local fighters who have joined the show throughout the last 2-3 years. And now we get to hear about one of the guys who was truly the pioneer of MMA, and his name is Scott Marker. And Scott, I'm just super happy. It's a long time coming. I'm happy that you joined me. So thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Shane. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, man. So Scott and I actually met at the gym. This is a common occurrence apparently around here. I met him 10 years ago. I had returned from a church mission. I was at Axiom, and I knew like you had like some Kempo ties to your like so you had like a Kempo shirt or something. I knew you were into Kempo. You and I started talking about stuff because I used to do Kempo karate and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and then I was a boxer for Golden Gloves for 3 years, and we would just chat. And I was a huge fan of mixed martial arts, and I knew you were a ref, and so we just started chatting. Scott's got all the knowledge, he's got all the stories, so you guys are gonna want to tune in today. It's awesome. Scott, listen here, like we've got to hear about this. So right now it's 2020, and we know that the sport has grown. I've talked to the fighters, the sport has grown here, but it didn't start that way. I want to hear about the origin. So before we got to 2020, let's talk about the earliest existence when you realized that like MMA was actually going to be introduced, like this mixed martial arts thing. What was it like back then when mixed martial arts was starting to be introduced into the Valley? Because it was kind of in a sense barbaric back in the olden days of like the early 90s, mid 90s. So I'm curious what your thoughts were as a, you know, into the martial arts realm when this was being introduced. What were the discussions that were being had?
Yeah, it started here in the Treasure Valley, really, because I do have a background. At 91, I got my black belt in Kempo, and our school in Boise was known, Ruin Day and I ran it, was known as a fighting school. So yes, I went to the internationals and won bunches of trophies and all that stuff, did really well. But it was just funny. I don't know, looking back, I was like, all the stuff I was winning trophies for had nothing to do with what I was doing when people come in and like say, hey, let's spar, right? So I was always looking for realism. I mean, really what it was, and something was missing. And so I started searching. I went to seminars, Wall AJ seminars, and then a guy named Dan McCluskey, which passed, who was involved in a bunch of other martial arts stuff, and great guy, just a great guy here in the Valley. He knew I was looking for realism in fighting, and so he gave me VHS tapes at Wendy's. I still remember the day. Two, so he loaned them to me. They're in-action tapes, the Gracie in-action tapes. I watched those, and they changed my life. I went, I got to do that, right? Because all this kicking and crap I was doing all those years, they're just negating it by taking him down. So that's how I kind of got the bug, was watching the in-action tapes. And then I ordered around about the same time, and this was like 91, 92, before the first UFC, I get the first Gracie Volume 1 and Volume 2 tapes, and I just watched them and learned Gracie Jiu-Jitsu off of those tapes. And then I'm not being a jerk, but I went around to a lot of the places, Chris Reyna and a lot of the schools around here, and they can tell you, I'm standing up. I grew up across the street from Kenny Keene's manager and boxer, not at the time, but so I used to spar for years out in the backyard, and so my hands were good. I wrestled in high school, did karate, could kick, but I was looking to kind of, how do I, take the whole thing to the next level? So the in-action tapes, then I got the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and I just watched the tapes, And I went into school after school, and I could hang with anybody. I just took them down and tapped right the stuff, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, right off the tapes. I tapped everybody. No one knew what to do. Everybody turned over, choked everybody out, armbarred everybody. And again, I don't think I had a lot of skill sets, but doesn't mean that I was so special. It's just I had skill sets nobody else had at the time.
Right.
And so then the UFC uh, 1993 is when Hoist Gracie and the first UFC happened, and I still remember where I was and like, holy crap, this is brutal, and it was the tournament style, and no holds barred. So it was really at that time I look at it was the MMA was coming to be, but it was still more NHB, right? So no holds barred, and then like I said, I watched that, and that got me further getting the bug and trying to get all the stuff together. And then you got people like John Peretti, who was the matchmaker at the time in the early days, who I didn't know his history, but I stumbled across him on Facebook, and we've communicated a lot. And I looked out his history, and he started the extreme fighting thing, but he's one of the real true founders of MMA. I mean, and I didn't know it at the time because it was single people, they had gloves, so it's looks more like versus the early UFCs look pretty rough. So
Yeah.
then, and I even kind of took some notes about the timelines because again, it was jam packed during those time periods. So then in '95, Shane Simpson, who ran a Kimpo school in Nampa, and I just stopped by one day and kind of became friends with him and then hooked him up with my instructor. And he knew I was into that stuff, and I go over there and teach him, jiu-jitsu to him and stuff. And so we were looking through a magazine that said, Gracie black belts in United States. And so we flipped through it, and Pedro Sowers out of Ogden, Utah. And Shane goes, I want to learn from that. Let's have a seminar or something. And so he called him up. Pedro could barely speak English. Portuguese, and he barely could speak English. And he actually is friends with the Gracie family. He had pictures. He was right there in the whole and the Gracie thing. And so he even did a challenge fight of his own back in the day. So I brought him up in February '95 was the first time I brought him up. And that kind of got things going to where more and more of the jiu-jitsu, but still the no holds barred part of it was there.
Right.
And then it just kept, so I brought him up. I didn't know how many times I brought him up. I brought him up every couple months. And then I started one of his blue belts, Rob Hadley, who's a black belt now, great guy, does Muay Thai and stuff. He'd come up and train us because it's expensive to keep bringing Pedro up. So we kept doing that. And then around that time, Chuck G out of Idaho Falls was kind of getting involved in the whole MMA thing. So he'd been him and his guys up and kind of doing that. And then in 1996, Dan Huff, who ended up being the first deputy commissioner of for Idaho Athletic Commission of MMA, Dan Huff used to come in my place and learn grappling because I was the only guy who really was doing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, right? Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time. Self-trained, and then Pedro was starting to come up and train me. And so I had lots of people roll through my place. Rulin kind of taught the Kimpo stuff up front, and I got to where I was teaching MMA stuff or Brazilian, ground Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu back there. So Dan Huff would come in, and there was a guy here from California that taught kind of a variation of Muay Thai. So he kind of taught me some of that, which I thought was cool. So I had a lot of guys roll through. So he'd come through my place. Tom Sepnex came through. I mean, just the who's who. Brandon Shuey, a lot of those people came through the place. And then because of Pedro's, a lot of times I'd bring Pedro up and I'd go recruit everybody. Hey man, you want to get your stuff real? Come here. So Brandon Shuey, Tom, I mean, a lot of these people that are kind of here now in the back got involved because I brought Pedro up, and that kind of got him involved. In 1996, Dan Huff put on the first, and I even though I say MMA, it was still kind of no holds barred because that was in the Maple Grove Grange Hall. It was freaking packed. I mean, now I can say this because it was '96, but I'm sure if there's a fire marshal, they would have shut it down because it was wall to wall people. And my guy, Dave Hammond, I think, is who they lied about his background. He's a tough freaking dude. They told me he's some traditional karate guy. He had some Muay Thai background and stuff like that. So the rules were at that event were open hands to the face. You could punch to the body, knee to the body. I think they had no headbutting. but you could, so that was kind of the rules. And then I think it was 10-minute rounds.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Well, real quick,
Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
because as you're getting into this, first things first, I had a couple questions that popped in my head.
Yeah.
Can you explain to the listeners the difference between like a full like sanctioned mixed martial arts, like the full out thing, what we see now with 5-minute rounds and this and that, and a no holds barred? Like, what's the difference between NHB and MMA?
Yeah. NHB is really kind of the beginning of MMA is really what it is. And no holds barred, depending on who you did, and they did some of that here, was more no gloves. You could do headbutts, bare knuckles, right? And even if they wore gloves, there was it still was tournament style, and you could, still you could headbutt a lot of times and stuff. So really, no holds barred for the most part was really probably the no glove stuff and headbutts and very little. They were trying to get so close as they could to a street fight is really what you're trying to do.
Okay.
Prove your crap works, right? And
totally.
and yeah, so that's kind of how the difference was. And again, thanks for having me because I've thought about this from the beginning as I'm a fan too, and so I've kind of looked at the whole progression of it and just amazed. But that's where kind of went from that to the UFC started, and it was kind of trying to get to MMA. And then once they switched to where they got more rules and they actually followed weights, that's also in the beginning. Is when I first started out. I mean, if you're within 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds,
yeah,
you're good. Especially if someone backed out the day of, right? Then it was like, okay, is there anybody breathing that we can get in the kit? Not me, I didn't do that. I was a rep, but a lot of promoters did this. Anyway, so that's kind of so in '96. I trained for a guy that, again, that's another thing back in the day. There just wasn't any tape, so you couldn't find out of anything.
Right.
And so you had to believe the promoters, and the promoters will be nice because I want to keep things positive, is embellished people like, oh, they have no record or they have this huge record. But my guy backed out the night of, they called me up and said, hey, your guy backed out. Can you do a demo? So I show up mentally off. I'm not think ready for a demo. And then Glenn Amador, who's still involved big time in the MMA, he was a light heavyweight wrestler for Boise State. And he came up to me. I didn't know him at the time. That's where I first met him. And he said, hey, I heard your guy backed out. I have a guy, friend that wants to do this, but hey, he doesn't want to punch or kick, right?
Okay.
He wants to just straight grapple. I went, oh, okay. Because I worked so hard. I wanted to kind of see how and I was actually, at that time, I was a white belt still under Pedro Sauer in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right?
Okay.
So, and a black belt in Kempo. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. So Glenn fought Justin Eilers, who's known, and he's passed away, got actually shot. But Justin Eilers, there's a whole nother story on him. But that's where Justin Eilers fought Glenn Amador that night. And there's a good example. Look at the tape. I mean, Glenn outweighed him by, we'll be conservative, 25 pounds. It was just, and it was kind of the slapping and kneeing and all that type of stuff. But anyway, so I go in against Eric Hines is who I got. And Eric Hines is a former Boise State wrestler. And again, Glenn said he doesn't want to punch or kick, right? So it's a 10-minute nonstop deal. So I go out and clinch, and he starts drilling me with uppercuts in the face. And this is bare knuckles. I'm like, oh, I get it. This is a fight. So we hit the ground, and he is just going 100 miles an hour, punching me in the side, occasionally trying to hit me in the head. It was kind of like the Dan Severn, Hoist Gracie. That at the beginning one was I was in the bottom, and it was, and I grappled a lot of people. He was freaky to be any college wrestler. You got to be a freaky level of strength.
Yeah.
But he was just freaky strong. And everyone's saying, you should have swept him, you should have this. And the whole time in my brain when I was fighting, I was thinking, man, he's right in my guard. That's my game. I got to leave him there, right? So I didn't really try to get him to. I didn't try to mount him or nothing because he was stronger than hell. I couldn't.
Yeah.
And so he was punching and stuff. And I started trying to get him in a triangle choke. I don't know why I wore shoes either, but that caused trouble. I had wrestling shoes on. I think because I was gonna. I don't know why I had them on because I don't remember, but I had them on, and it caused trouble because I couldn't. He was hanging on really tight. So I tried to get him in triangle choke. He picked me up and slammed me down. Everyone's like, the crowd's going, holy crap. It doesn't hurt. That didn't hurt worth crap, So then I Ezekiel choke, which I wore a gi. He wore nothing, right? So I I did an Ezekiel choke on him, and I thought I started hearing him gag, and then all of a sudden people are in the crowd are going, "Hey, he's tapping," and the referee stops it, and then it goes crazy, and he says he didn't tap, and his corner's going crazy, and all chaos. So Dan Huff actually put that on and came over to me and said, "Hey, Scott, would you mind doing an overtime? Because there's so much controversy." I said, "Yep, I don't want to leave it like this, right?" And I tell you is I knew that I had to finish him because he was on top the whole time. No one knew, the whole right. He was on top, trying. The only time I got hit in the whole thing was at the beginning. And he tried to hit me a zillion times because I was really good at defending. Is that the first 3 or 4 punches he hit me right in the beginning of the fight. But other than that, I blocked. So we went into an overtime. I can't remember what it was, 5-minute overtime or something. And he just started to stall. And so I went, "Oh, he's just sitting there." So I got him in a guillotine. And I part of me, I don't know if I should, but I was almost thinking, I got to make sure they see he taps this time, right?
Yeah.
So if you watch the video, he's tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping because I thought I don't want to let him, get anybody. I want to make it clear that I won. So I tapped and I just let him go and I stood right up. I wasn't exhausted at all. He had gone 110% the whole time. He was tanked, and I was just like waiting for him to make a mistake. So anyway, so that's kind of how I got the claim to fame on that first fight.
It's amazing because you actually posted a video of this on Facebook, and I was blown away because this was literally, for anyone who's listening to this, you might not have seen it. Hopefully we can go, like Scott can maybe redirect this or tag me in it, and I'll share it to my page because it's amazing. Like, it's an old school like VHS style tape, but it's crazy in there. The fans around here were not used to that style of like an event, that kind of a combat sport. And it's true, like you were saying stuff that kind of resonates with me, Scott, because it reminds me of the Hoist Gracie. Like when he would go, he was comfortable on his back because at that time, nobody understood why is he so comfortable on his back, which threw a lot of wrestlers off because they're like, "Well, I pinned you. Now what do I do?" They don't know. He's like, "Oh, this is where the fight starts." And it's true because as you're talking, I'm remembering the tape. And the guy was a monster, and he's got energy for days, dude. He's a young dude, probably just slamming you around. And you're like, let's just be real, you're not like the biggest, tallest guy in the world. Like you're strong for what you are, and you just went in there technically sound and held your own. And I love that you said, he slammed me, that didn't hurt. Some people this is why when I watch fights, Scott, and the crowd or the commentators like, "Ooh," and they're making noise. I'm like, yeah, but sometimes like those big old slams, depending on how the person braces, sometimes they don't hurt as bad as they look. Like so you can brace yourself properly for it, and you're just fine. And I love that you were like, yeah, wasn't even tired. You knew what you were doing. But back then, everyone just didn't know. So they're probably thinking this guy's winning the fight because he's on top. No, that's not how it works. This isn't how it works. Scott knew what he was doing. So it's just so cool hearing how you had your gi and he didn't. That's another Hoist Gracie type thing. Gracie used to wear his gi back in the day when you could just wear whatever. So most guys wore nothing. He wore his gi and you choke him out with his gi. So that was the first example there. Was that your first actual, I know you had done karate tournaments. You had talked about going to tournaments and stuff. How did you compare that event, like a true fight, if you will, and as close to a fight as you can get at that time, to your karate tournaments and so forth that you had done prior to that?
Yeah, and that's kind of why I was looking for something different because, again, at our school, at the time we were ahead of our time. We just because again, I have a wrestling background, not crazy, but I was good, and then I boxed, sparred for years. Then I could kick. I mean, I knocked several people. We had people come into school. I knocked several people down, kicking them in the head. So I could kick, punch, and then once I added jiu-jitsu, that was kind of it. But I stopped doing all the karate stuff just because it was just I couldn't make it work under pressure. I mean, you talk to anybody nowadays, oh, that's some common sense. But back then, people just didn't get that a lot of that stuff. I wanted to see if it worked under pressure. And so that's really what it was, is that, here I am, a white belt, and in a normal thing, I mean, Eric would have killed me. He's a freaking strong guy. I can kick and punch and stuff, but especially if I didn't know any takedown defense back then, I would have never survived. So, as a white belt in jiu-jitsu, that saved me, really did. And so it's totally different. I mean, the tournament stuff, a lot of it's tag like stuff, and it's just can it help you? Yes. And now, and I don't get too much in the weeds on this, but nowadays you can actually see the stuff I used to do not as good as they do. But I mean, the kind of karate, I call it karate crap, right? Fancy stuff that wouldn't spinning kicks and all this type of stuff, and then right that I was doing. But when the early days of the MMA, that crap didn't work because people just shoot and take you down.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it's 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 advanced so far, the martial arts, that you have a solid freaking MMA base. You can wrestle. You have jujitsu. You have Muay Thai. You have this rock solid base. Now what they're doing is, for several years now, is they're sprinkling back in that crazy crap that would have never worked back in the day. Now people are surprised to hell when all of a sudden this guy spins around and does a spinning, jumping back kick to his face. Anyway, so that crap just didn't work back in the day. Watch the early UFCs; they show tapes of people, right? These karate people breaking bricks and all their forms and stuff, and then they get in the cage, and what they look like an untrained fighter. They're swinging like this, you know. So that's what I want to do is just, and that's really the difference is just what the big difference is you watch Hoist's tapes, how he's going to fight back in the day, right? Or you watch someone's going to fight now. How does it look when they get in the cage? That's really the biggest differences. And a lot of these karate type tournament type people, right? If you get them in a MMA type situation, right, it's going to look totally different, right? Uh-huh. So that's kind of the biggest differences right there.
It's super interesting hearing that, and I can totally see it. It's crazy watching those. If anybody has ESPN Plus, a subscription to ESPN Plus, they have all the fights, the olden day, the original UFCs. I think up to the first 10. It's crazy to watch. Like, it's almost like I used to love them, and now that I've kind of seen them, like, oh my gosh, like it was really, really bad. So really, really bad fighting. It was like really one-dimensional, very, very poor fighting. So it's just interesting to watch. And I see it too, because even in the boxing world, Scott, when I'd go and I'd train boxing, now obviously that has its limits too, but we'd be in the boxing ring and people would come in from a karate background. And I remember my boxing coach once, I had a karate background too, which helped me in a sense because it helped me know how to breathe when I was punching, and certain little things that people don't realize helped me stay like in state. I wouldn't panic. I wouldn't tense up. So I was able to pick up boxing pretty quickly, different stances and so forth. But I remember him saying, this guy comes in, he's got a karate stance, and his hand positioning and the way he stood was completely different. And he goes, dude, we're going to break right through that karate. And I remember him sparring for the first time, and it was true. Like, he just had a weird style. Now with MMA, like even Francis Ngannou had talked about it, like the boxing, he loves boxing, the actual sport of boxing, but the training in boxing, like traditional boxing, is different than boxing in MMA, like where he puts his hands because he has to defend a takedown. But they're so, like, now they sprinkle in a little bit of everything, and it's just different training nowadays to make it more realistic. But it's when you have just that one specialty, it can typically be exposed if you don't know how to do the other. So it's just crazy to hear how the cool thing about you, Scott, and I'm geeking out right now, is the fact that not only were you an instructor and you're helping teach and implement all of this into the Valley, like you were bringing up Pedro, you were holding these, training sessions to implement all these new things into the fighting styles here, but you were a fighter. Like, you got in there and practiced what you preached. And I think that's rad. So after that 96 bout, or whatever you want to call the match, what happened then? So what happens? We got a lot of popularity. Did people like it? Did you guys decide you wanted to do more of those things? Did you want to compete more? What happened then?
Yeah, then after that, the next one in the Valley was a tournament style. It was put on by Chris Sidekicks, Chris Reyna. Yes. It was in Nampa High School gym, and they spread mats out, and it was a tournament style. And they asked me if I wanted to fight, and I'm one of those guys that from the beginning, Charlie Forte, I think I said the last name. He's a big fighter back in the day, just a punch like a brick house, right? But he's a guy that could just bring his bag, and you can't do that nowadays. But back in the day, if someone was no show, he'd fight anybody anytime, right?
Right.
I wanted to make sure I was in shape. I'm not saying he was in shape, but just me personally. I needed to mentally prepare for a couple months. I wasn't going to just get in there and look crappy, So anyway, they asked me after that one. It wasn't too far after. I think it was early '97. Is that the next one came that Chris Reyna put on, and it was a tournament style. So you fought three times in one night, like the UFC. Right. Wore gloves. They had heavy light. So there's weights, but it's heavy light.
Yeah.
Anyway, they asked me if I want to do it, and Chris did, and I just said, hey, I'll do the next one, right? And he says, hey, you want to ref? I said, I got involved in refing. I ref that whole night. So that's how I got involved in refing, and so it was really the first one with gloves. I ref that one, and actually Eric Hines fought that night, and he fought a Muay Thai guy that was supposed to be all the bad. Everybody say he was a bad dude and stuff. And Eric shot in, picked him up like a professional wrestler, and slammed him down, and then tapped him out. And everybody goes, "Oh!" And then people start to understand, "Oh, no wonder that guy Eric gave Scott such a hard time. He's freaking tougher than hell."
Yeah.
So then he was he was supposed to fight another guy, but that guy got banged up and came out and walked back out. He didn't want to fight him because he got banged up in his other fight. So he ended up fighting Jens Pulver.
Oh, okay.
And he actually tapped out Jens Pulver, but there's rumors flying around. The thing I think is that they were friends. They're both Boise State wrestlers, so they agreed not to hit each other. Right? So they're out there rolling around trying to tap each other out. I heard Eric was just a better wrestler, and so he tapped out Jens. So that gave me a lot of cred back in the day, just because it's like, wow, Eric gave me a lot of trouble. Well, Eric's a freaking tough guy,
Yeah.
and he fought actually a lot of times here out and did really, really well, and left the state and did pretty good. He's a really tough guy. So anyway, that was where that's kind of that happened. And then I like to say, like the Billy Idol song, lit the match, right? Then it just went freaking crazy. I mean, fights start. I mean, different promoters start setting up things. There was Taylor Irvin. I can't remember what year it was, in the '90s. Did one down at the fairgrounds. This is a great story. Did one down at the fairgrounds, and I have it on DVD, right? And I'm the ref, and I have like shorts on, black shirt. No. I was sponsored by Power Bar at the time. And anyway, I still remember watching the tape. I've forgotten all about this. And fighters getting into the cage, have tennis shoes on, like Nike shoes and cutoffs on and stuff like that. And it was just, but there was some MMA. I mean, it was a rough version of MMA that time. But the thing was interesting about that night is that I think it was Charlie fighting. I was the ref that night, and I was saying break, and I think the other guy who was fighting Charlie popped him after the break, and Charlie went. If it was Charlie, I'm pretty sure it was him, went freaking ape crazy, like, hey, he hit me after break. So I'm holding on to him, and I trip actually. And both corners go freaking barreling in. It's just mayhem. And they lead, and I'm the whole time I'm thinking, what? The music's just loud, heavy metal music still going. Lights are on. I'm thinking, it's like kindergarten, man. You need to like shut half the lights off and turn that freaking music off, because it just kept going and going. And then it settled down. You look at the tape, I'm sitting in the corner going, you got to be kidding me. This is like just so not cool, So then it broke out with some couple girls out, and so there was there's some chaos and some fighting stuff. Well, the funny thing is that a guy that was there that night that I was friends with, he lives in California. He reaches out and goes, "Hey Scott, you're on TV." I go, "What?" And there's a TV show that I think it's You Got to See This, where they show like a rodeo getting this cut, right? Somebody sent that in, and they said, "Oh, let's see how these fights go down in Boise, Idaho." And that whole incident, fight and everything breaking out, is on national TV.
Go figure, man.
So it was just, but the cool thing is that, and this is where things were starting to get closer and closer. Oh, Mike Kyle, he's fighting the UFC. He fought that night, I think. So there was, yeah. And then, and real quick back, and I talked to Brandon trying to figure out, but Justin Eilers, I brought Pedro up, and then Pedro did kind of a MMA down in Utah, little things, and Brandon fought in it, and Justin fought in it. And then not too long after that, it was before I fought Eric Hines, Brandon brings in Justin into our place at Park Center. That's where we were at for years, at Park Center Health Club there in Boise, and brings in Justin. And back in the day, the rules were, standing up, if you didn't have gloves on, then you kind of slapped each other and stuff. But if you had gloves on, we're going to go light, medium, or hard, right? And there's no weights. So I don't think we had gloves on anyway. But I just remember Justin comes in, and I didn't know who he was, right? And he's just not smiling or nothing. I go, well, how do you want to go? He goes, oh, well, medium. And then Brandon goes against my buddy Joe Jones. I go against Justin, and Justin bum rushes me, slams me against the freaking wall, and headbutts me. The only cauliflower I ever got was from him because I wear headgear all the time, and headbutting me, and then I tapped him out, armbarred him, and he was furious. And so then he's a big dude, and then he went against my buddy. My buddy tapped him out in a leg lock, and he was not anyway. So with him, we kind of, and so that was before the 96 fight. That's what it was. That was before the 96 fight because I actually kind of didn't like him very much because he just had such a chip on his shoulder, I thought, right? So I actually, that day that I showed up in 96, I remember him coming to me and going, "Did you see the size of my opponent?" I go, "Yeah, I did." He goes, "Oh, he's huge." and Justin's a guy, I got to give him credit, especially he's passed away, but I give him credit. Justin's a guy that when you see him training, he's at one level. And when he got in competition, he raised it to a whole different, not everyone, a lot of people get the pressure of, being in the cage, being in a competition or any type of boxing or any competition, and your level drops because you're nervous and you can't break to the pressure. Justin always stepped it up. And when he got in there against Glenn, he lost the decision, but holy crap, he did fantastic. So anyway, so that's kind of the Justin Isla story. He kind of, I was kind of hoping, I wasn't a fan. I was like going, "Oh yeah, he does look pretty big." And then years later, he came over and gave me a shirt and was real cool with me, after he's in UFC and stuff like that. So
Isn't that funny though? How like the relationships over time, like respect is gained and so forth. But you just like in the heat of I love it. I love your confidence though, Scott, because it's like, okay, dude just headbutts me, boom. Okay, oh well, then I just armbarred him and I got it. You're just like, okay, I guess it's on, and then you would just take it. One thing you pointed out right there that I wanted to touch base on real quick as well is in the fighting world, it's very like this happens all the time. In boxing, it was like this all the time, but it's like this in any sport for that matter. It's true. You're nervous, and everybody gets nervous. Doesn't matter how confident you want to look, you get those nerves. Teddy Atlas was just talking about the boxers, like in your first boxing match, you're looking over at the other guy, and he looks just like he's loose and ready to go, but he's got these butterflies in his stomach. He's looking over at you, and you're like, you got the butterflies in your stomach, but you're trying to put on a straight face, so you're good. Like, and he goes, so you just have to realize it's a mind game, because even Mike Tyson will tell you how nervous he was to come out. And then like these MMA fighters like Donald Cerrone and Chael Sonnen were talking about the walkouts and how sometimes their coaches have to force them to go out because they're so nervous to go out there. And Donald Cerrone struggles typically in the first round of his matches because he really has a hard time coming out of his shell. He's just got that social anxiety. But the thing is, what have you learned in your experience as a fighter, because you were there from the very beginning all the way until now, and how to channel that energy, like you were just talking about, Justin, like how to channel that energy and use it for good? Because everyone's going to get those same nerves, but how do you utilize it for, like, I guess, adrenaline rather than like something to like pull you down?
Yeah, and it's like you say that clear back when competing in wrestling in high school to martial arts, I always got nervous. I mean, it always frustrated me. St. Pierre, he said something once that on an interview that was great. He just said, he used to worry because he couldn't get to sleep the night before a fight, and that was and he goes, then he got to the point where he goes, "Guess what? Fights tomorrow, I'm not going to sleep." I thought, that's probably what I should have. I think that's kind of the type deal is you kind of get in your head after a while, like, I'm just going to be nervous. But so, that's just, I'm going to be nervous. So don't be nervous about it. So that's how I handle it, because I got to the point where when I heard him, I said, that's kind of how I was, because for whatever reason, competing, I always, Chuck G, who I'll talk about, great guy. He really helped influence not only refereeing, but the fighting game. Because back in the day, he was the man in the area. Him and I used to talk about, training, getting ready for a fight or something. People were always going, "Are you worried about getting hurt?" And we're like, at the time, now I'd be worried about getting hurt, but at the time, no. I'm worried about looking bad because I'm out of shape. That's what I didn't want. And not really, that's him and I were freaks about, we wanted to be, if we're going to be trying to put our butts on the line or something, we're going to lose because we lost the right way, right? So anyway, but that goes back to your question about being nervous. I just got to the point where I'm going to be nervous, right? So don't be nervous about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it sounds funny, but that's true. I can totally understand what you're saying. Like, it sounds weird to some people that are like, what do you mean? But no, it's like, just come to terms with it, and then you go. Yeah. That's just part of the game. Yeah. Scott, going forward out of the late 90s, early 2000s, in the Treasure Valley especially, What was the first actual like true promotion? Nowadays we have what they have Front Street Fights, which is like a
Yep.
major promotion here
Yep.
in the Valley. They had like was the Extreme Fight Series or something like
Yep.
that for
That's
a
Casey
while.
Thompson.
Okay.
That's the biggest reign. Casey Tom. Well, Casey was really the first big show in Idaho,
Okay.
and a lot of people again. And one thing I want to mention right here is that you got the Jens Pulvers of the world, you got the Justin Eilers of the world, and I wasn't a fan of either one of them when they first came in because they had attitudes and stuff. But looking back, I probably had an attitude too,
Right.
egotistic, right? So, and then later on in life, we all kissed and made up. It was like, So I just like to say that is that they're a lot of it's just younger beginning of the sports and stuff. So it's the same thing with Casey Thompson is a promoter. Is that over the years, there's a lot of people complained about Casey, this, that, the other, and I used to tell people, something, the best thing to do is put together a promotion and show them how it's done. And I saw promoter after promoter over the years would set something up, nobody would show up or very few, and they'd cave in. Casey was good about putting some butts in the seat. That's one thing he was good at. And I actually reached out to him to get some numbers because I was trying to add them up and stuff. And then I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning of the fight, but in the beginning of the interview, but he had a reign for 8 years it was Quest Arena, right? It just switched its name to Quest Arena. So he's a big promoter, and the state got involved and started the sanctioning because there's a million sanctioning bodies. The rules are all over the map, and so the state started to get involved, and the first officially state sanctioned one was in 2006, and that was Casey's first extreme fighting series. And it was at Quest Arena at that time, which now is the Idaho Central Arena, which CenturyLink, and now Idaho. But it was Quest Arena, and I remember that to this day. It was sold out. It was freaky. I'm there. I'm like the main ref, right? And I actually had Chuck Gale from Mountain Home, and one of his students come and do a demonstration for the audience because we wanted to make sure they knew what they were watching.
Right.
But am I kidding you? It was sold out. It's the biggest event that I've ever seen in MMA history. It's the biggest. It was the UFC because of all the equipment and stuff like that. They couldn't pack that many people in there, right? But I'm just saying that it was the biggest event. So anyway, that was the kind of Casey did the first event. He did in 8 years. He did 70 shows.
Wow.
So
Okay.
he put on a ton of shows and he packed the seats. They got to the point where they kind of drape it off so you only have half the arena, so then you don't have to worry about trying to get as many people and stuff like that. So Casey's really, and then a whole bunch of other promoters came up around Casey, but Casey for the longest run was probably the biggest promoter in the area. And then there's, like I said, then that was 2006, and that's when the state actually licensed. So Rulin and I and Chuck, we all got licenses to the state, right? But you still didn't have to. So you could ask the state to sanction you if you had amateurs, right? But if you had pros, they got to that. I think they changed that. In the beginning, you could just go with the state, but then the state kind of got frustrated because people were kind of going around the rules and stuff. So then they said that well, if you have any pros in the card, you have to be sanctioned through the state. You can't get your buddy to sanction you or something like that.
Right.
Then that turned in ultimately to where the state took over the whole thing and said, hey, if you run an MMA event in Idaho, you have to run it through us. And then at that time, it was they asked me to be the head of officials for Idaho, and I'd already been doing it, but they made official. So if you were going to put on an event like Bellator, the first time they came here, they called me up. Anyway, so and then anyway, so they what that did was really back in the day is a lot of people, and again, I'm trying to keep it on the positive thing because there's a lot of all the negative stuff all the time. But the good side of things is that at the time, I mean, Rulin ended up being kind of the head of officials for out of I didn't like to travel as much, right? And
Right.
Rulin did in 1 year, like 2007, I think he said himself out like total, I think was like he did 24, right?
Okay.
So back in the day, there was fights going all over the place in Boise, other places around Idaho. And what we did was we bring standardization is what we did is that I mean, the officials, you couldn't be drinking. I mean, back in the day, we had, I mean, before I took over, right, we had officials that were drinking
Oh,
alcohol,
jeez.
right? But, and like that, and not saying the referee, but I'm saying the judges sometimes, drink, and I know that, right? So, and sometimes it'd be someone's buddy, and I'd go like, like, so what type of background do you have? Well, I watch football. Oh, I like MMA though. I just started, I mean, I'm going, and they're judging.
Yeah, for
So
real.
anyway, so there's kind of, anyway, so when it comes to your original question is like promoters and stuff. Casey's really one of the big promoters, and there was like other ones that put on stuff, but really the big powerhouse for years was Casey Thompson.
That's crazy. As I remember going back, I didn't realize who it was, but I just remember the fights starting to be more and more like popular around here. Like just going to the arena downtown Boise and kind of seeing it, and they were big. Like it was cool because like a lot of us fight fans. Obviously, I came from a boxing background, so I enjoyed that stuff. Anyways, I was watching the UFC as that was starting to take off in the early 2000s, really big and stuff. So it was like, oh, this is the next thing to the UFC. And now that I like look back on it for real, Scott, we're talking like 15 years later or so.
Yeah.
I'm like, for a smaller promotion, those were some major events. Like he did a great job. Like I mean, they did a great job putting everything together because those are like really well ran. We see it a lot with Front Street Fights now. Like they've got it now, but like that was the original, like getting those true promotions and building it in the valley where people they weren't scared of it. They weren't. Now they know what they're getting and they're actually excited for it. And they're starting to know the local fighters, for example, like these the local gyms and stuff, and then people know them now, so it's kind of cool. You've referenced a couple times reffing, and I want to talk about your reffing experience, Scott, because a lot of people they see like you have the fighting experience, you had the training experience, and now you have like the instructional experience. Now you have like the reffing experience. You're very well rounded in mixed martial arts, so to speak. Reffing. What is it like? Have you gone through any experiences where you might have like, do you go back and watch film and say, I probably shouldn't have called that one that early or anything like that? Because Herb Dean and like you hear about all these guys in the UFC, they take a lot of flack for like either early stoppages or not stopping it fast enough. They get like a lot of flack for it. Do you ever have those experiences? Do you enjoy reffing, or is it a little stressful when it comes to like fan and fighter backlash?
Yeah. Overall, you get as a ref, you get a ton. I mean, and that's what my job was, is kind of protect some of the other officials, the judges and the refs. But like for me personally, that's one thing. I had people that weren't fan of me being refereeing and stuff. And then years later, I go, something, I appreciate the way you did my fighters, me, because they went out to other states, and they just said that, they didn't really realize how professional we were until they went to some other places, right? Or they went to somewhere else that was really high level, and they said they run it exactly like you guys run it. So I always said as a referee, the big things I was as number one, keep the fighters safe, right? Number two, be fair, right? So meaning that, don't let people break rules. If they, as a referee, don't let, make sure that you're being a good referee and you're being the same on both impartial to both people. Then the next thing right underneath that is I'm there to make sure that there's a great fight for the fans, right? So that was kind of as a referee. I got asked on some interviews years ago, like, well, as a referee, do you worry about the cameras, where they're at, right? And I said, well, that's twofold question, right? Is one, if they're laying on the ground and nothing's going on really crazy, right? I might take a step over because I know that the camera's right behind me, right? That isn't right. But if somebody's or a fan or make it so the fans could see something better, right? I might take a step over, right? But if it's about the guy's right there on the arm bar, it's getting nailed against the cage, right? I don't give a crap about the camera. I don't give a crap about the audience. It goes to number one thing I'm worried about, the fighter's safety. So I want to be right there. I don't give a crap about anything else. But and then when it comes to reffing, a lot of times people, over the years, when I was reffing from the beginning, some other people have refs and stuff, and I'd watch them, how they reffed, and I'm always trying to get better as a ref. And I'd watch John McCarthy, was a big guy. Herb Dean's a great guy. I'd watch them, what they did, and try to emulate some of that stuff. And again, back in the beginning, they go, well, what training did you have, Scott? And I got certified in a couple of different associations, right? But I helped them fix their things to be a ref because they were not even correctly done, right? So I'm like John McCarthy, is that I started in the beginning. I just trained myself watching John McCarthy, right? Other officials, and then on the job training,
Yeah.
right? But over the years, Rulin Day and Chuck G and I, we constantly, if there was a controversial call, right, and as a referee, you were kind of, not quite right. We had next day calls. We call each other all the time. So hey, how do you think? And we'd ask each other there too. But we were always, now we always err toward the person in the cage and as a referee. Before Casey brought in the camera to do the review, right? I had a main event was Gabriel. I mean Gabriel. I can't remember his last name. Drives me crazy. Gabe Morales, and against anyway, it was against. Oh, Ray. No, I'm sorry. It was Ray Morales against Gabe. I can't remember his last name. Anyway, it was a big fight, huge controversy. I'm the referee, right? And this is, I mean, that's one thing Casey was good at, is getting rivalries in there, right? They both didn't like each other. Tons of people show up to, right? And Gabe comes out, just nobody knew at the time. He has heavy hands, man, and he just demolished him. Hits the cage, and he's out, right? So I stop it. I mean, I'm talking this within the first minute or so of that. It didn't last very long, right? And Ray's corner goes ape crazy, coming out, asking me, what the hell am I doing? And the whole time I'm picking Ray up, and I lean him against the cage, and I'm standing there because I'm scared if I let go of him, he's gonna fall down and hurt himself or something, right? He's like, then just like a lot of times, within a minute or so, he's back. Wait a minute, I'm ready to fight, right? So that's happened a couple of times to me where something like that, and then somebody sends me the video. I've had a fighter do this. Go back and say, hey Scott, I'm sorry I got so mad at you. I rewatched the tape and I was out. And as a referee, sometimes you just can't. So we're always we're critical on ourselves all the time. And again, critical, we're just trying to get better. You're not gonna be perfect, right? So we always err towards, I'd rather stop, a fight early than let one go late. That was kind of always the rule. And so you're gonna get shit for that.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? And that's how all of us had the philosophy is that, it just, maybe you could have taken 6 more hits, 2 more hits, right? But when I'm looking at you, you got to intelligently defend yourself, and you're not, and you're and it's also, as a referee, it isn't the quantity, it's the quality. So if you're getting some people just, if you're getting rocked, right? You better start defending yourself, or I'm going to stop the, or Ruben's going to stop the fight, or Chuck's going to stop the fight. Anyway, I hope that answered your question. So we used to think about it like relentlessly. We thought about it all the time, and I questioned myself. I had one fight once. I won't get too much details on it, but I didn't see it. I asked the judges, and they said they didn't see it, but the guy said he got kicked in the groin, right? It was amateur, right?
Okay.
And so, and he gets the crap beat out of him, you know what I mean? And then that was a day that, something, next time I'm just going to, as an amateur, I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt. If he, now I'm not ref anymore. So now, but at the time I wouldn't have told people, but just because as an amateur, I didn't want to, do that. So,
yeah.
anyway.
Those are interesting stories, man, because I can only imagine the difficulty. I never want to be a referee in any sport. I always hated refs when I was, competing in basketball at the highest level. Like, I didn't really have any problems in the boxing world because it is what it is. If you're getting pummeled, you're getting pummeled. If you're not, you're not, And I was lucky that even when I was getting beat, I had refs that allowed me to try to still. They gave me more than enough time to try to come around and show something, but. It's hard. It's a hard job. It's a hard job to have, and I commend you for being on all parts of MMA. Again, fighting, instructing, and reffing. I mean, you've got all of it. You've got the experience. Now, I do have to ask you too, because you touched base on the fact that you're no longer reffing.
Right.
So, when did you retire from reffing, and what's your future in mixed martial arts? Do you want to continue on in some form or fashion, help and support the mixed martial arts industry, especially here in the Valley of Idaho?
Right. Always support it. I mean, I just love it. I had a friend just the other day reach out to me and say, hey, Scott, why don't you want to get way back involved in it? And I said, man, I even did the math. I did it for 21 years. You know what I mean? Head of officials for 11, a decade plus, right? And I went, I opened my own business in 2018, writing another book. I said, I'm still involved. I love it. I was an official for UFC. And all that. I still in Bellator. So I still like it. I'll always be involved because it's just a passion of mine. But it's just like sooner or later you got to pass the torch. I mean, you really do. You got to get some new blood in there. So back in, and then this is something I mentioned before it that now it's kind of leaked out a little bit, but for a lot of years, I tapped a lot of people out, punched a lot of people, hurt a lot of people, and I got hit too, right? But I gave out more than I got usually. But I was so this leads into I was going to fight my last. So I was supposed to fight 4 times. 2 times I had an opponent up to the day of, and they both backed out on me, right? So I was like, had a guy that I was going to train for, and I'll get in that story in a second. So I'm going to be training for this fight in 2000, right? So getting ready for that fight, he backs out the last freaking second. And then, I got in a car wreck, I think in November. And so then I go into a neurologist that does some MRIs on me and stuff like that. And he goes, oh, you're perfectly fine. But he says, oh, but you have multiple sclerosis. I'm like, oh shit. So I was like, oh boy. So then I knew, and I had, at the time they diagnosed me as there's 3 types, but the least aggressive. So it's a flip of the coin, I could be totally fine for my whole life, or majority of people though, something's going to happen. You're going to slowly degrade down. So that was in the end of 2000. And then, so then I had things were, fine and everything was good. I had to kind of change some things I did. And Chuck G, he doesn't have anything, no like MS or something, nothing wrong with him at all. But him and I would talk all the time. To referee, we would not work out so many a day before. We didn't want to be sore when work we wouldn't work our legs hard before we ref ever, right? So we were always talking about stuff like that. But then in 2017, I was reffing and I had a couple fights left to ref, and I just didn't feel confident with my legs and stuff. And so I told Ruin, I say, Ruin, I don't feel right tonight. You got the rest of the night. And he goes, oh, okay. And he didn't get deep. But he's one of the few of my friends I told. He knew it since the beginning that I had it,
Okay.
Then he also watched me bang a bunch of people and tap people out. He was like, oh, wow, you did pretty good. But then for me, it was just like a slow kind of progression of it. So in 2017, then I stepped out because I just didn't feel confident. Called the state like the next day and just said, hey, here's the deal. I don't feel confident anymore. So you want me to be head official still? I'd love to do it. And I go, nope, we want to keep you in. You just won't. And then I had a neurologist actually saying they would switch medications and get me feeling it. And I said, nope, I'm done. Right. So I want to be 100% or nothing. And so that was kind of my end of that. And the reason I didn't let a lot of people know is that, and too much in the weeds on this, but I had 2 employers in my life. One of them was an owner of a company, take me and another lady did hiring back in a room and say, hey, whatever you do, don't hire somebody with MS or some other chronic disease because, our insurance rates are through the roof. And I'm going, holy shit. That he doesn't know I have it, right? That happened to another employer too. So that's kept me keeping it kind of, I kept it a secret. And then because I did training for my fights, I dislocated my knee twice. One time, beautiful throw. I hit through a guy, and people said it was fantastic. And then, boom, my kneecap went off. It was brutal.
Oh, gross.
It was the most. Again, I broke my collarbone wrestling. Didn't hurt at all. Almost compound fractured. Nothing. I've done all right, but that kneecap about half killed me. Anyway, so over the years, like Keith Owen, he's a friend of mine. I trained there. I got my purple belt from him. When we would train, we'd do the 6-minute drills and stuff like that. Is that it was always a problem, right? Getting towards my 4th, 5th, or 6th guy. But then it just got to the point where I just couldn't, kind of anyway. So in 2017, I think it's around there, is that it just kind of got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'll so I do a lot of judging now. So I switched. Tom Supnick took over the head of officials, and he's a great guy. I actually had him involved, and because and people don't, this is all Ruin did, but no one else knows this. I actually was kind of bringing him in, having him, even though he did a lot of reffing outside of Idaho, I was bringing him in because of his background. He was knew Herb Dean really well. friends with him, so he could bring in a lot of additional things that keep Idaho growing.
Right.
And so I kind of helped him go along, and then now he's the head of officials and doing a fantastic job with all of that, and he does a lot of repping and stuff like that. So I do judging now, which I'll tell you, I think, and then tell me if you want to get into it. The rules is a big thing, but I referee time to time, right? But I mean, excuse me, judge from time to time because something would go wrong. They needed a judge and stuff. I think it was a pretty good judge, but really, you especially with the new rules, right? Reffing's easier.
Is it?
Judging is the new rules are just a pain in the butt because they're just not in a good way, but they're just anyway. So that's where I've kind of, so yes, I'm still going to be involved, but just not, I mean, I was in charge of everything for the state. I mean, I get a call, I mean, and then that's why I had Brulin, went to Tom Katsulmita, who was the commissioner at that time, and said, hey, went to lunch with him and said, hey, why don't you make Rulin head of officials for everything out of Idaho, and occasionally if he can do it, I do it. But and then anything in Idaho, I'll take care of all the officials and stuff like that. So anyway, so that's my reffing career. So I started in like 1997, I think.
So
And
it's
then
a full 20, 21 years, almost 20 to 21
yeah,
years.
yeah. So I got a
Crying
good,
out loud.
I got a great, like I said, I got a great run. I can't complain about it.
Oh man, what was okay? Just tell me your favorite fighter. You've had a lot of local fighters. You've been around a
Right,
lot of local fighters, guys who've gone on to the big times.
right.
You know, what was your favorite fight that you've ever reffed? If you could choose one out of the 20 plus years that you've done it.
Wow.
That's a tough one. I know. I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah, there's a bunch. Uh,
Name one that
mm,
sticks out to you, just one that just popped into your head, even if there is a bunch. It's like, what's one that popped into your head? One of your favorite fights?
well, I mean, the Gabe and Ray, that was one that stuck out just because of there was such rivalry.
Right.
I mean, there's just like, and it was the whole build up before the fight. But one, I'd have to kind of think about it because, like I said, there's been just a ton of really good fights that um, get pulled off at the last. I mean, Josh Wick, he's a freaking stud. He his we the state. I didn't get involved in this, but because I am involved in it. But they had to give him a special waiver because he wasn't even 18 yet to fight, and
Oh,
I think
jeez.
so. He was like 17. I don't know how he always looks like a kid anyway. So he looks like he's 12, and I think he was a fight of the night. So that was a fantastic fight. There's been just so many fights that my favorite fights are always the ones that go back and forth, back and forth. And what drives most people crazy is when someone's getting the worst end of things, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, big knee, big
Land a
arm
bomb.
bars, arm bars. Anyway, yeah.
I love that, man. I love it. Hey, a question for you too, because you mentioned judging. I know this is going like long, and I apologize, but I just love the conversations and the stories
Oh,
you're
no
sharing,
problem.
man.
Yeah.
The judging thing. There's a discussion out there for mixed martial arts at the professional level if they should have live judging, right? Like where you're showing the scorecards, where the
Right,
fighters know where
right,
they
right.
stand every single round. As a judge, with your experience, do you think that should be implemented into the mixed martial arts realm?
I've heard about that, and I do think it is, and I'll tell you why. And I won't get into details of who, but people high up in the UFC, okay, high up in the UFC, I had conversations with them, and I said we need to educate um, the community on the new rules, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they poo-pooed me and just said, "Oh, we want a bunch of armchair quarterbacks." And so, but you're a sports guy, you get this, and this is why I think we should change. Real quick, go back. I'm I'm really proud of myself and Rulin helping out for some of the stuff we brought. Professionalism, people that are actually trained and knows what the hell they're looking at when they're doing stuff, um, and then also accountability. I'm the guy that Brett that does Front Street Fights. I'm the guy. I taught those guys. They came to me. And I taught them how to. And I said, "Here's the deal. They used to in the past, not when under my control, but in the past, they would have the thing like a cry tournament where they'd say judge number one, judge number two. I'm like, that's a bunch of crap. That doesn't hold people accountable.
Right.
So what
Accountability is huge in this field.
accountability, man. So I would say the only thing I did change, which is rather than have if I'm a ref, Scott Marker, then ref two, ref three, switch the names around. So it doesn't then it doesn't it's just a whole anyway. So you don't have the same judge, but calling us out right now. So I'm the guy implemented that years ago, and a lot of places didn't like that, that weren't under my control yet. and didn't like that. I'm like going, you got judges that aren't accountable. I mean, I mean, you got to be accountable, So yes, I think I think they should know where they're at round by round. I think that the judges need to be held totally accountable for what they do. Yes, so I am just because, but what a lot of times what I do is I look at other sports for MMA, how I kind of like increase things and make things better. Football, for example. I'm not a football guy, but I watch it occasionally. And why did that referee call that? And they can break down, look, see, his toe was there. And then they
Right.
break everything down to help educate the audience on exactly why they rule or why they messed up, right? So I'm just a person that thinks, yes, I think the more accountability, the better, because you're gonna weed out bad referees. Is what you're gonna
Totally.
do. I mean, you're gonna weed them. I mean, you are. I mean, if you got a referee, and I've said this forever, and I weeded out a couple earlier that I was in control, but I had people around the powers pressuring me to have someone come on before I took over everything, right? And I'd watch them, and they didn't know what the hell they're doing. I mean, their scorecards were way out, and so basically, I'd never once I controlled everything, I kicked all those people out of there. So
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but yes, I'm all about accountability. The early days there was none, and you get a lot higher quality if you're a referee. I mean, a judge. If you're a judge, right? You owe it to the fighter to show them why not only that, and then here's another thing is you need to be able to explain why the hell you judge it that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's another thing is that a lot of times judges are like, well, I just thought he won. No, I want specifics of exactly why you thought he won. So I'm all about that accountability, because there's been a lack of it over the years, and I think the more the better. It's gonna raise up the whole standards of the referees and
I'm
the judges.
so glad to hear you say that, because as a fan, like I would love to see it too. I understand it's a little more complex than just like what it might sound like to the average person, but I like looking forward to that potentially being something in the future for the sport. So Scott, to wrap it up, man, you've been in this for a long time. I mean, a long time. You've been in the sport. You've seen the growth of MMA in the Valley. It's so cool to see you as the pioneer. Hear the stories of the people you've been around, just everything and the growth of it all the way up until now. Where do you expect the sport to be in the next 10 to 15 years in Idaho, for that matter?
Fred Street Fights has actually done a pretty good job. I mean, great job actually of raising it to another level when it comes to professionalism. I think that they've done a great job. Uh, just overall, just a really, really good job. I looking, I couldn't even really guess where it's going to be, because stuff has just. I could have never foresaw where it's at now,
Right.
and so it's just free. We were athletic back in the day when we were doing it. People are world class athletes today. I don't know where it's going to be. I think we're going to continually see Idaho keep getting people that are UFC level type people to go in there, just because we keep getting more and more higher level people here, more and more schools, higher level schools here, schools that are here already getting better and better. Uh, sky's the limit, really what it is. The one thing that, it's because I'm getting old, is that in the early days, I'm like, pound them to death, but I'm like, wow, that's, we get, I do think down the way they're going to have to change the rules a little bit, not only here in Idaho, but in the UFC, because we adopted the new unified rules.
Right.
We were one of the first ones actually that adopted them, and because the level of the fighters have gotten so high that the amount of damage they can do is getting so high that I think they're going to have to revisit some things down the road, because they're just, oh man, that the caliber. So I don't know where it's going to be down the line. It's hard. It's just, I don't think it's going to be the hockey stick, because I think there's, but just the evolution of it, the way that it's going to just go to a new level that we won't even be able to guess. I mean, it's going to just continue. I don't think it's going to be as much, just because of how fast it's come, but
Right.
still, it's just like any sport. They keep breaking new records year after year. Records keep getting knocked down. USC, you're going to keep seeing the level raised every single, and here in Idaho, same way. You're going to see the level continually grow year after year after year. So I'm excited about that. And I'm excited to be still part of it.
For sure, man. I'm excited to see it too. I'm right there with you. I think the evolution of the athletes, the training is getting better. It's just more consistent around here.
Yeah.
Going to get bigger, better, like faster, stronger athletes. You won't see the necessary like hockey stick growth like you might have seen prior, but like it'll still be just the evolution in the fight styles and everything. I feel will continue to improve because it has in the last 15 years, which doesn't seem like it's crazy to me. That was in high school, and now it's like, whoa, that was 15 years ago. So it's just crazy to think about it now, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm a fan of the sport. I'm a fan of you because like I like to see like where you've come and the part that you play, the role that you play in mixed martial arts in Idaho, and I appreciate you for that because I think it's awesome. So, Scott, I just want to say thank you once again for joining us, sharing the stories with us here on the Game Time Guru podcast, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, Shane, I really appreciate you having me.
Absolutely.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, man. And for everybody out there listening, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. If you have an iPhone or anything, an Apple device, make sure to leave me a 5-star review. Let me know what you think about the podcast. Share it with your friends and family, and we'll be coming to you every single Friday with a new episode. Take care. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of my show. Now, if you could go and do me a favor, head over to iTunes, give me 5 stars, and leave me a review. It would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support.